Hello and welcome to our webinar. We are celebrating the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and decided to offer you this webinar from our NGO office in New York City. As you know, the Institute of the Blessed Virgin Mary and Congregation of Jesus work in partnership here with the United Nations. I'm Genevieve, a youth representative for the Institute of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And with me today, I have fellow intern Greta Hunt, Sister Cynthia Matthews, and Sister Cecilia O'Dwyer. In the next 45 minutes, we will have a short introduction, followed by a series of stories highlighting different aspects of human rights. At the end of our webinar, we will be providing instructions for an optional hands-on activity. If you think you would like to participate and have not already done so, please download a copy of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which can be found on the United Nations website. Thank you, sit back and enjoy.
So, as we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we're going to look at why these rights are important and why you should know what they are. Human rights are the basic rights and freedoms of individuals established in the Universal Declaration of the United Nations, which has now been translated over 500 times. Human rights are universal in that they apply equally and without discrimination to all people, and that they are inherent in that everyone is entitled to them regardless of nationality, race, gender, religion, or any other status. You are entitled to these fundamental rights simply by fact of being human. They are rights because they are things that you are allowed to do, to be, or to have. They are there for your protection against injustices. They are also there to help create peaceful and equal societies. It is important that you are aware of what your human rights are so that abuses such as discrimination, intolerance, and injustice can be eliminated. Born out of the atrocities during World War II, the United Nations Universal Declarations of Human Rights was signed in 1948 to provide this common understanding of what everyone's rights are. It forms the basis for a world built on freedom, justice, and peace. Next slide. International human rights law sets out the obligations of states to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights for all. These obligations impose specific duties upon states, regardless of their political, economic, and cultural systems. And these have been developed over time as society has progressed and advanced in the last 70 years through the development of a number of conventions as seen in the diagram. Today, we will be sharing the stories of 4 individuals from all around the world whose experiences highlight the different ways human rights are experienced and violated worldwide, so that it becomes clear to you what your human rights are and why they are so important.
The first story we're going to share today is Health as a Human Right in Alaska. According to Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. Unfortunately, for the approximate 32.9 million people living in the United States without health insurance, this is not necessarily being met. High cost is the #1 reasons Americans give for not being able to access healthcare. The United States does not offer universal healthcare. Rather than operating a national health service, a single-payer national health insurance system, or a multi-payer universal health insurance fund, all of which have a mandate for universal healthcare coverage, the US healthcare system can at best be described as a hybrid of these. Despite the existence of Medicare, which provides care to those over 65, Medicaid, which targets low-income groups, and programs for veterans, many Americans are left out. Those with low to middle incomes, who do not qualify for Medicaid, are much more likely than their counterparts in other countries to not visit a physician when sick, get a recommended test or treatment, fulfill a prescription, or see a dentist. Next slide, please. This is Whitney Whitman's experience. Whitney is a mother living with her husband and 2 children in Bird Creek, Alaska. She has been without health insurance since 2016. As a mental health counselor and legal mediator, her income is too high to qualify for Medicaid. However, between paying off student loans, mortgages on a home and rental property, car payments, and other costs of living, there simply wasn't enough left over for health insurance. The cheapest plan she could find for a family of 4 cost almost $2,000 per month, with a deductible of $10,500. However, the decision to live without health insurance is not ideal. In countries like the United Kingdom, Canada, Switzerland, Japan, and Germany, where health coverage is universal, the number of bankruptcies related to medical expenses are negligible. In contrast, medical bills are the single largest cause of consumer bankruptcy in the United States. According to Rob Dillon, an assistant professor of health services administration at the University of Maryland School of Public Health, a cancer diagnosis, car accident, or even just a broken leg can cause thousands of dollars out of pocket. Whitney knows this all too well and lives in a constant state of worry. When her daughter was sick, she waited almost 2 weeks to go see a pediatrician, which ended up costing almost $300 American. When her husband broke his finger working on their house, he didn't go to the hospital. Similarly, she has put off getting an inhaler for her seasonal asthma. Whenever her children go skiing at a nearby ski resort, she fears the worst. Health insurance prices in America continue to rise. In 2005, the average annual premiums for employee-sponsored health insurance were $2,700 for single coverage and $8,200 for family coverage. In 2015, this almost doubled to $6,200 for a single individual and up to $17,500 for family coverage. 59% of physicians in the United States acknowledge that patients have difficulty paying for their care. Although the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, made improvements in the US healthcare system, including increasing the number of adults between 19 to 25 insured, expanding Medicaid in a number of states, and prohibiting insurance companies from denying insurance to those with pre-existing conditions, as well as ensuring equal premiums for men and women. The United States still has a long way to go in ensuring the health and well-being, including medical care, for all. Thank you.
So now I'm going to highlight the importance of education through telling the truly inspiring story of a young Afghan girl. The right to education is one of the most important and urgent of our human rights, and education opens the door to the integration of all other rights. Without education, eliminating poverty, reaching gender equality, implementing health and social services, and reaching peace is unattainable as well, and attaining your other rights is also extremely difficult. It is the first step to accessing all other rights. Without an education, people are left disadvantaged and vulnerable in society without access to employment, healthcare, and simple day-to-day tasks. Both individuals and society benefit from the right to education. It is fundamental for human, social, and economic development and a key element to achieving lasting peace and sustainable development. It is a powerful tool in developing the full potential of everyone and ensuring human dignity and in promoting individual and collective well-being. Education allows individuals to exercise all of their rights through learning what their rights are and why they are so important. This is not a privilege, it is a human right. This means that states have an obligation to protect, respect, and fulfill quality education to all its citizens. While in some parts of the world, going to school and getting an education is compulsory and the everyday norm, there still remains millions of children and adults around the world deprived of educational opportunities, many as a result of social, cultural, conflict, and economic factors. Political instability and economic factors in many parts of the world keep inequalities in education access entrenched in the social system. Conflict zones and peaceful societies are often a driving factor, leaving children unable to go to school. Shabana Basij Rasik, a young Afghan girl, encapsulates the importance of a right to education and the struggle too many children around the world have to go to in order to access it. Making up one of the 70 million children out of school, growing up in Kabul, Afghanistan, under the Taliban regime meant that she, because she is a girl, was not allowed to attend school. Understanding the importance for education, her parents went to great risks to provide her this right. When in public, girls had to be escorted by a male, and so Shabana would dress up as a boy and escort her and her sister to a secret underground school, in doing so risking both their lives. Underground schools for girls and women emerged throughout the Taliban regime as a response to strict and unjust rules. Next slide. Shabana attended this secret school until the regime was overcome, though the situation today is still far from equal. Shabana went on to attend high school in America, where she realized just how important her education was, inspiring her to make sure other girls like her are able to access it. During college, she founded Hella, a non-profit organisation dedicated to empowering Afghan women through education, and today is the managing director of the School of Leadership Afghanistan, a non-profit that helps young Afghan women access education worldwide and jobs back home. Her story highlights the importance of the right to education and the fight too many people around the world have to go to access it. Though this fight is not over. Next slide. 66% of Afghan girls aged 12 to 15 are out of school today, and 63% of adolescent girls are illiterate. More than 40% of Afghan schools operate with no buildings, rather tents, and with unqualified female staff teachers. Girls are at risk of violent assault as they walk to and from school. This is the state of girls' education in Afghanistan today, a reality driven by fragile social conditions, high poverty rates, a lack of well-trained teachers, and persistent cultural norms that inhibit women's visibility in public life. And this paints the picture of just one reality, but one that exists in so many places around the world. It is alarming stories like Shabana's which exemplify just how important the right to quality education is, and how important it is that we know what this right is so that we can ensure its universality.
Thank you very much for that. Now I'm going to share a story of a survivor of human trafficking for sexual exploitation, and just to see the connections with human rights. And listening to the stories of survivors and learning from them has been an essential part of the work done to address the issue of human trafficking in a more humane way. And as it was originally seen in terms of crime and police activity exclusively. So first of all, I would like to thank Sister Angela Reid and the Office of Mercy International at the United Nations for their work on stories, because the case I'm going to take or to use is taken from their advocacy guidebook called Inherent Dignity, which you can download, and it's very informative. But anyway, one of the learnings that we have is that when we listen to the stories of survivors of human trafficking, we can see that they are in a very vulnerable situation right throughout their childhood, and very often with brutal violations of human rights on a number of levels. And this is called a life course approach to human trafficking. We take into account the childhood, the time the girl or woman is trafficked, and the experience of being trafficked. So this is the story of Kathy from the Philippines, who was 20 when she begins to tell her story. And we'll begin first of all with her childhood and the right to special protection as a child. Now, Kathy says, my mother had been a prostitute and met my father in a bar. She became pregnant with twin girls, and we were adopted out to separate places. She goes on to say, luckily for me, I was adopted in the local area, so I was able to be reunited with my grandmother and my father. Now, so here we have a Universal Declaration article number 25 about motherhood and childhood, and that they're entitled to special care and assistance, and that all children enjoy the same social protection. So you can see that Kathy's story was vulnerable right from the beginning. Now, the human rights of children are fleshed out in what's called the Convention of the Rights of the Child. And Article 55 there recognizes that children should develop their full potential and be free from hunger, want, neglect, and abuse. And it confirms that children are neither the property of their parents nor helpless objects of charity. They are human beings in their own right. Now we'll go on to the next phase, to the right to education. And Kathy says, I attended school up until my second year of high school. My grandmother was the one who bore the cost of my schooling, though sometimes my father would give her money. But when I was a teenager, I left school because I told my grandmother that I would help to earn money. So I started to work as a waitress. So there you see the right for everyone to education, which is Article 26 of the Declaration of Human Rights, where it says that everyone has the right to education, and education shall be free. and education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality. So in sum, Kathy received a full elementary education as her human rights. She was lucky in that. But however, she was not given the opportunity to fully realize her educational capability, as she felt compelled to leave school and to earn money for her family. So the next step is she begins to earn money for the family. So the right to an adequate standard of living. She says, when I was a teenager, I left school and I started to work as a waitress. Now, Article 25 of the Declaration of Human Rights states that everyone has the right to an adequate standard of living with health and well-being for themselves and their family, and that children, this is in the Convention of the Rights of the Child, of special protections of the rights of children to an adequate standard of living. That is mandatory. But we see that Kathy's need to work in order to support the family's basic income is driven by deprivations to her right for an adequate standard of living. We move on. Kathy meets an acquaintance, and he asked her if she wanted to work in Cebu. Now, Cebu is a big city in the Philippines. She says, I told him that it was very far away and I was only 16, but he arranged for 2 other friends of mine who were also minors to come to Cebu with me. He told us we would earn good money as waitresses, but when we arrived in Cebu, we were transported in a van to a club. For 3 weeks, I was just dancing on the stage, and then one night I was told that somebody had barfined for me. I did not know what this meant. A more experienced woman explained that a man had bought me. I could not escape because there were people who watched what we were doing. We called them watchers. So here we have the Article 34 of the Convention of the Rights of the Child, which establishes that states should protect children from all forms of sexual exploitation and abuse. So here we have Kathy in this situation. Now we'll just roll back a bit to look at the right to be free from violence, because Kathy was separated from her mother when she was born. She was adopted. She saw her mother once in a market when she was 10 years old, and she wished she could have had more time with her mother. But when she was 13, she says, I attended my mother's funeral. I was told that she was pregnant at the time and had been beaten up by her live-in partner. She had many bruises all over her body, and it was very scary to see her that way. Now here there's an explicit right of children to freedom from violence, but Kathy actually experienced fear of violence, and she articulates this in her statement. We'll go back now to Kathy's rights in the trafficking experience. The right to liberty, security, and the right to freedom of movement. Kathy says, I was so ashamed, but I could not escape my situation. I had more customers after that. Some gave me big tips and some were very nice. I was cautious because some of the more experienced women told me that foreigners were more inclined to beat their customers. I was always on guard. So we see trafficking is affected through high levels of violence, intimidation, and coercion. And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, establishes that everyone has the right to liberty and security of person. That's Article 3. And Article 13, that everyone has the right to freedom of movement. On the other hand, you have the question of the right to a choice, free choice of employment, and freedom from slavery and forced labor. Now, we remember what Kathy says, that for 3 weeks I was just dancing on the stage, and then one night I was told that somebody had barfined me. I did not know what it meant. And when I found out, I discovered I could not escape because others were watching. Article 4 of the Declaration of Human Rights states that no one shall be held in slavery or servitude, And Article 23, everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment. And we see now that Kathy was deprived of these rights. She also had the right to just and favourable conditions of work and fair remuneration. But listen to what she says. She says, I gave all my earnings to the 2 women who were my managers. This included any tips that were given to me. They said I had plenty of debts. My debts included payment for living in the apartment, my food, clothing, and makeup. So now, the right to just and favourable conditions of work is a right guaranteed in Article 23. It's the right to just, favourable conditions of work, and another section of Article 23 that everyone who works has the right to just and favourable remuneration. So we see Kathy's situation there. Another human right is the right to freedom of opinion and expression in Article 20. And in Article 21, the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association. So it's all about participation and expression. And Kathy says, I pitied myself for what happened to me. I felt that I was alone and nobody would support me, that I would just have this lonely life. I interacted with my co-workers, but my own true feelings I did not share. I did not trust anyone. I did not know if I told them my real feelings, whether they would tell me or tell my managers, and that would have caused conflict. As I was angry with myself, I wondered how I could let all this happen to me. So we see that when women are trafficked, when girls are trafficked, it's not surprising that, and it's almost impossible for them to participate and even to trust each other. So now, finally, Kathy was freed, and she says, I was in the bar for 2 years, and just before I turned 18, the bar was raided. Our apartment was raided early in the morning. They raided 3 apartments simultaneously. All of these were operated by the same managers, and there were 90 of us young women there. But she says not all were minors, right? During the raid, I was shocked and afraid. I even hid behind the door because there were plenty of cameras, and we were soon on television and in the news. So you can imagine that situation there. But at least she was freed. And now we come to her phase as a survivor and as survivors in general. Because in actual fact, Kathy herself, her story has a happy ending, which I will tell you a bit about. But the question of survivors and how survivors kind of manage to move on with their life and what rights they have is worked out mainly in the what we call the Palermo Protocol to prevent, suppress and punish trafficking of persons, especially women and children. So here you have the human rights of the trafficked girls and women's fleshed out in this document, and then in others as well. But a bit of information about from experts on this matter. Victims who break free from their traffickers often find themselves in a situation of great insecurity and vulnerability. They may be physically injured as well as psychologically or emotionally traumatized. They may be afraid of retaliation. They are likely to have few, if any, means of subsistence. So just to look at the trafficking protocol, number 110 states that survivors of trafficking have the right to support and protection, the right now, and the state is obliged to take care of this after they have escaped exploitation. That's one part. Article 6 requires states to consider implementations, measures to provide for the physical, psychological, and social recovery of victims, and in particular, the provision of appropriate housing. It also requires states to provide counselling and information, in particular as regards their legal rights, so that they can move forward in life. Yeah. So thanks to organizations such as the Good Shepherd Sisters Center in Cebu, where Kathy was helped, And here they work with survivors, and we have to be very thankful to them. And they work to ensure that the deprivations suffered by these girls and women over many years are remedied in as much as they can. So thank you very much for that.
Are you a human rights defender? Human rights defenders are people who individually or with others act to promote or protect human rights. They are people who have the courage to stand up against injustice. Human rights defenders are active in every part of the world. Today, conflict and fear are increasingly used to spread violence, division, and silence civil society throughout the world. Countries are turning their backs on solidarity and justice, and the human rights defenders are increasingly the targets of attacks, harassment, intimidation, surveillance, censorship, arbitrary detention, enforced disappearances, and even killings, just for standing up for what is right. According to the annual report on human rights defenders at risk, more than 300 human rights defenders were murdered in 2017. Yet, in spite of this violence, there are more human rights defenders working on more issues in more countries than ever before. Next slide. In 1998, after 14 years of lobbying, advocacy, and negotiations, the UN General Assembly adopted the landmark Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, known as the United Nations Declaration on the Right and Responsibility of Individuals, Groups, and Organs of Society to promote and protect universally recognized human rights and fundamental freedoms. The adoption of this declaration was a critical point in human rights history because it recognized in international law the extreme importance and legitimacy of human rights activity and the need to protect it along with those who carry it out. Now you will hear from a human rights defender.
I am Brother Varghese Thekanath, Director of Montfort Social Institute, a Center for Human Rights and Sustainable Development Education, Hyderabad, India. I am also the Secretary of the Neighborhood Community Network. As a human rights defender, there are two basic issues on which I work. One is to protect the rights of domestic workers. There are 30 million domestic workers in India. They are not recognized as workers. Our struggle is to unionize them, advocate so that their rights as workers are protected and enhanced. We work on the housing rights of people who live in slums. They are the people who build the city, sustain the city, but they are not considered citizens of the city. We federate them, form units at the local level, at the city level, at the state level, also through national and international alliances. India was one of the countries that was reviewed under the UPR, Universal Periodical Review, in 2017. There were 250 recommendations that were made by countries to India. India accepted 152 of those recommendations. So this is a major challenge that is before us who work with the domestic workers, to help the government, help the civil society, help others involved, other stakeholders, so that we have a law that protects domestic workers that will help Government of India to ratify Convention 189. Similarly, the other sector that we work in, housing, Government of India, there were 3 recommendations during the UPR that asked the Government of India to provide housing for all. Government of India has taken a policy decision that housing for all will be a reality by 2022. And Government of India has accepted the recommendation that came during the UPR. Now, once again, we want the Government of India to put in policies that are necessary, laws that are necessary, more than the schemes and policies. What we need, housing need to become an entitlement. If it is to become an entitlement, then we need a law that ensures housing for all. We want the budget to be, the necessary budget to be provided. And then we are talking about just not any housing. We want people, citizens to live in houses that are adequate, that will protect their dignity, and enough facilities, basic amenities that are necessary. And we want these houses to be built in situ in slums, in situ, where they live or near where they live, because their work, livelihood is as important as where they live. So both these need to be protected. So when we talk of housing for all as a right, it has to be adequate, it has to be affordable, it meets basic needs, it protects livelihoods. I am concerned, as far as our organization is concerned, that is working on, and these are major challenges that we face. Yeah.
It is good and possible to work with the government and like-minded group on the issue of human rights. Becoming part of Universal Periodical Review, UPR, is one of the ways of doing it. UPR is a unique process which involves a review of human rights records of all UN member states. It is a state-driven process under the Human Rights Council to declare what actions the governments have taken to improve the human rights situations in their countries and to fulfill their human rights obligations. Under this mechanism, the human rights situation of all UN member states is reviewed every 5 years. 42 states are reviewed each year during 3 working group sessions dedicated to 14 states each. These 3 sessions are usually held in January, February, May, June, and October, November. The result of each review is reflected in the final report of the working group, which lists the recommendations the state under review will have to implement before the next review. So, watch out for your country's turn and get involved.
Now, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us, and you've had an overview of human rights. We've addressed specific human rights such as education and health, and then the way in which all the different rights are interconnected in the life of a person. And we've seen the human rights defenders and the Universal Periodic Review. We have mentioned a lot of articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I'll just call out a few of them here. We've had 25, Article 26, Article 3, 13, Article 4, Article 23, Article 19, and Article 20. So now we're just going to offer you a little exercise if you'd like to do it, and it's all about knowing our rights. And we encourage you to take 3 human rights that are important for you, and just to work out for yourself how they work in your life. Just take 3. And if you see here on the slide, you have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And at the beginning, you were encouraged to download it. If you don't have a copy, you can actually download it. And there are places where they actually give out little copies of the Declaration of Human Rights, and especially as it is the 70th anniversary. make the most of it and make the most of this opportunity. If we know our human rights, it is good for us and it is good for others, because then we recognize how these rights work in our own lives, but we also recognize how they are working in other people's lives, and if people are actually being allowed to fulfill their human rights, or if on the contrary they are not. And that is important for all of us. So finally, we'd like to thank you for watching our webinar, and we're very happy to have had this opportunity to meet with you online. And let's hope that this will be a good experience for you, and that it will also be helpful for you and all the people that you might like to share this with. So thank you very much from all of us here in New York, from Cynthia, from Greta, and Genevieve, and Cecilia. So bye-bye now, and thank you very much.